someone who's in a vegetative state communicate thoughts? A new study seems to say it's possible. Here with us now is David Corcoran of our science department to explain why. David, I know the study appears in the New England Journal of Medicine. Give us an idea of what it says.
These researchers worked with people who are in what's called a vegetative state, meaning
comas.
They've lost consciousness for a long period of time. They're not able to respond to commands. And usually these patients are diagnosed at the bedside by a doctor who does tests involving eye movements and other things, and determines that the patient is in what's called a vegetative state, as, for example, Terry Schiavo was famously. In this case, they looked at 54 patients who were considered to be in a vegetative state, and found that 4 of them were actually able to not only to respond to commands, but actually to answer yes or no questions, not vocally, but
through an MRI, right?
They were put on MRI scanners, and this is an ingenious experiment. The doctors asked them to think about tennis, and when you think about playing tennis, one part of your brain lights up, the part that has to do with motion. Then they told them to think about being in their house, and another part of the brain lights up on an MRI scan. That's the part that has to do with space. So they were able to ask the patients questions that could be answered yes or no.
And they weren't actually answering physically with their mouths. They were answering with their brains, basically through their thoughts, right?
When the answer is yes, think about tennis. When the answer is no, think about a house. So they could ask the patient, is your father's name Thomas? And the patient would be able to think about tennis. If the answer was yes, that part of its brain would light up. And then when the researchers went back to check with family members, they found out that the answers were 100% correct.
So now what does this mean for people beyond this study? I mean, I assume that there are many cautions here. I mean, it's not going to completely be, great news for people who are suffering these conditions, but it does tell you something about the state of what consciousness is, and maybe that doctors should be cautious about bedside diagnoses?
Well, that's absolutely right. Our writer Ben Carey says that this is probably going to change the way that these injuries are diagnosed, because it's obviously no longer reliable to trust a bedside diagnosis. You can't always tell whether a person is able to answer these questions. Another issue that it raises is if the patient can answer a yes or no question, then presumably he or she can answer the question, do you want to continue living in this state? So that raises all sorts of ethical questions. It'll be very interesting to see how they play out.
So it offers hope on the one hand. It certainly offers a lot of complications potentially on the other.
Yeah, I think there are 2 caveats that we should mention. One is that this would not have applied to the Terry Schiavo case, although I did mention her earlier. These were all patients who had suffered traumatic brain injury, blows to the head. This guy had been
in her case, it was never clear completely.
Well, her heart stopped beating,
right, but we don't know
cut
why.
Off oxygen to the brain. We don't know why, but that kind of injury is not what was under study, and it seems unlikely that she would ever have been able to respond to yes or no questions, even on an MRI. The other thing is that this is a relatively rare ability. Of the 54 patients who were studied, only 4 were found to be able to answer yes or no questions. But those 4 were able to answer all of the questions correctly.